Hi there, everyone. Bryan from the Oraculos School of Astrology, and welcome to Mychal Fix My Stars, my new astrology hotline where I help real people troubleshoot real challenges that they face within their lives using the wisdom of astrology.
Okay, so my question has to do with mental health, and it's something I've struggled with for most of my adult life and probably before. Um, and I wanted to know if that was just something I had to be resigned to, or it's something that I can do something about, and if so, what? How can I um, improve that aspect so it's not like something that is so debilitating.
All right, so this next question has to do with mental health within the context of this caller's chart. And she wants to know how to create a greater container of stability within her life, or whether or not some of the mental health challenges that she's been through is something that she just has to be resolved to going through within the context of this lifetime. Now, as a caveat, I am not a licensed medical professional. I am an astrologer who has spent a lot of my life in either directly medical study or in medical adjacent study. And you can find out more about what that looks like by reading my bio on oraculosastrology.com. However, when we look at astrology traditionally, every astrology reading began from the perspective of assessing the health and the vitality and the constitution of people. So it behooves us as astrologers to know how to practice what has now come to be known medical astrology as well. Because medical astrology is just a larger part of an actual astrological practice. It just goes hand in hand. And it's not even that it goes hand in hand. I think that this notion of us practicing medical astrology versus fertility astrology versus natal astrology versus psychological astrology is a very modern concept because as an astrologer, we're meant to practice everything so that we could give robust commentary to a person about all aspects of their lives from the perspective of their birth chart. And the very first thing we have to talk about is the physical body, but also the psychological and the mental health of that person as well, from the perspective of an assessment of the first house and its lord. So this isn't medical astrology, it's just regular astrology as it was always practiced before probably the last 100 years. One of the things that has stood out for me within the context of my medical astrology research and practice, especially working with people who've had multiple ailments or multiple challenges from a health perspective, both psychological as well as physical, is how some of those things show up in relationship to the planet that is ruling the ascendant, as well as to the ascendant itself, as well as to the entire chart as a whole. So I think that the caveat to this, or I think that the other part of this is that there is no one thing within our chart that gives us the full story of our lives. We have to do a full assessment of the chart in general. And when it comes to the topic of mental health from an astrological perspective, very often there are things that are rooted within the early environment, particularly the early childhood environment of the native, that can be a challenge or that can show up as a challenge within the context of the early environmental upbringing. And so I always go to the first house and the fourth house in order to see when someone tells me that the mental health side of things is something that really stands out as a very potent challenge within their lives. I always go to the first house and the fourth house in order to see what's going on there. And what we see with the first house within her chart is that she has 0 degrees of Sagittarius, 2 minutes rising, and she has the South Node rising there as well. The South Node rising, or the South Node in the first house, is one of the things that we look for from a medical astrology perspective because that can oftentimes indicate a sense of there being a very real sense of lack of vitality within my physical being. Now, that isn't the only thing that can represent that, But the South Node in the first house can oftentimes represent that there is a hole, or there is a lack, or there is something within the physicality of who I am that's preventing me from really feeling strong and vital and vibrant within this lifetime. So having the South Node in the first house can already put us in a space where we feel as if we aren't really the most stable within our physical constitution. And so that only becomes corroborated based on the more things that we see either occurring to the ascendant or occurring to the rule of the ascendant within the chart. So that's the first thing. The second thing going on within this chart is that Uranus is rising. And the distance between the ascendant and Uranus is 9 degrees. And as you see, she also has an early ascendant rising. So, one of the things that I would do in terms of a quick and dirty rectification on the spot is I would ask her what happened when she was 9 years old, or what was the major traumatic breakup or separation that occurred roughly around the age of 9 years old that would have been something that represented a very real point of shock or trauma within her early childhood environment that could have made the early childhood environment not feel like the most stable place in the world. And the reason why I would ask that is because very often the early shocks and traumas that we have within the early childhood environment can very much represent the kernel seed of what later on develops within our lives as very debilitating or challenging mental health issues. So, within this chart, we have the Uranus rising. Very often, when a person has Uranus rising, they come from an environment of a very real sense of chaos. And that chaos can manifest in terms of the parents got divorced, and so therefore the child had to be volleyed back and forth between the two parents across the country or across the state or whatever. There wasn't a feeling of stability from that perspective. Or it can be that one of the parents or both of the parents were in the military, and as a result of that military lifestyle, there could have been a sense of the family constantly moving, and therefore that person grows up not necessarily feeling as if they are rooted in anything or as if they're rooted anywhere within this lifetime, because their knowledge of what it means to come from anywhere is based on this fabric of instability, where every time they try to get settled, every time they try to establish friends, their family picks up and moves again. So, those are two of the ways how Uranus rising can oftentimes manifest within a person's chart. And therefore, for the person who already has the South Node rising, it leaves them feeling frazzled. It leaves them feeling absolutely shot within their nervous system because they don't necessarily know how to keep it together, basically. We have this thing in the West where we tell people to keep it together, but sometimes the sort of instability that people may have been born into could make it very challenging for people to keep it together in a very strong or consistent way. So that's one of the things that we see going on within this chart as well. That can manifest as a very real sense of anxiety within the life of a person. That can manifest as a very real nervous tension within the life of a person. And those two things combined for a person who's already having the South Node rising can be a little bit too much for their physical system to bear. So those are things that we're seeing already occurring within the context of this chart. Now, how do we work with that? Even before I talk about the fact that the moon is at the southern bending and the moon is also in a square relationship with Uranus and the many, many other things that can be said about this chart, the question is, how can we work with that? One of the ways how we can work with this, if we have the South Node rising as well as the Uranus rising, is to know that we have a very peculiar constitution in general, and the peculiarities of our constitution makes it such that we need more action plans set in place for self care. This person could have a plan set in place for if she's finding herself going through a particular episode or going through a particular sense of crisis from a mental health perspective. What are some of the rescue plans that I have set in place to actually support myself when I find myself really traversing through a very challenging time from the perspective of my mental health? And so those things need to be things that are soothing, things that are calming, things that represent places of stability within the life of this person. I've even suggested to someone once who's had a similar chart to this to go and learn how to count rice grains or find your local rice grain counting community, because those things become a type of meditation and they create a level of intentionality within the life of the person that they probably did not have within their early childhood environment. So if I'm sitting down all day and counting grains of rice, what does that actually have to do for my mental health? It allows you to feel some sense of stability, because the reality is, grain by grain, all this is rice. It's not rice and a pebble, it's not rice and a piece of corn, it's not rice and a seed, it's just rice. This notion of doing practices that are calming and centering and grounding becomes a very important thing, especially when we have Uranus afflicting our ascendant. We need to do things that are constant things that we do every day, that are inalienable practices that we don't shift from, because those things become an anchor of support for us, especially when we find ourselves navigating periods of crisis, or especially when we find ourselves navigating particular mental health issues coming up within the context of just daily life. So I know that the counting grains of rice thing sounds like nabbish advice, but it can actually have a very profound effect on someone who's going through a particular episode where they need to find an anchor, and they need to find an anchor quickly. So that's one of the things that I would say to someone with the Uranus rising. I'd also say creating a meditation practice could be a good idea. However, when you have Uranus rising, you oftentimes don't have the internal silence necessary to create a meditation practice that actually feels profound, because going in the mind and trying to address the mind by going deeper in the mind for someone with Uranus rising is kind of like telling someone to get over their fear of cotton balls by laying down in a field of cotton balls. Which there was this thing with Maury that was going on YouTube, where this lady was terrified of cotton balls, and that old devil Maury took out a jar of cotton balls and chased the woman across the stage with the cotton balls. So the point is, sometimes the remedy is within the poison. But when we have Uranus rising, the remedy is not necessarily to pursue a deeper cerebral means of calming oneself, because the template of that oftentimes doesn't really exist within that person. So, what I oftentimes say to people who have a Uranus that is afflicting things within their chart majorly is touch the earth. Find your local gardening community. Find a community where you can dig your heels into the soil, touch the earth, plant a tree, have a garden of your own that you take care of on a daily basis. Have something that has a physical connection to the earth in order to ground the lightning that you bring through your life on such a daily basis. The challenge with people who have Uranus rising is that instead of moving into things in life that bring stability, they oftentimes gravitate to things that keep them in a state of high strung tension. And so, what we want for these people to do is to touch the soil. And even if you are working in a field or working in a profession that's creating a sense of high state tension and changeability within your life, touch the soil, plant a tree, plant a forest, become a part of your forest hiking association, or do something that allows you to ground the lightning that's passing through you. Because oftentimes, if we don't have these physical grounding mechanisms, that Uranus and the lightning that it brings to our soul and psyche can have a further debilitating effect on our lives later on. And so within the chart of this lady, we see that she's also having the moon in a square relationship with Uranus. And the moon in the square relationship with Uranus, from a medical astrology perspective, is saying that there is a very real relationship between anxiety, which is the Uranus word, and the physiological constitution of her body. And so she might be someone who is having a direct impact of when she gets stressed, that automatically manifests within the physiological and the hormonal constitution of her body. And so this is something that she should be mindful of, especially the moon is here in Pisces. We know that Pisces is ruling the feet. This is something that we sometimes see within the charts of people who have a restless leg syndrome, or people who have a nervous tic, or people who just have a sense of spasming in general. The moon Uranus could sometimes manifest in that way. But overall, I think the greatest solution to having Uranus afflictions is to do something that gets you out of your brain and that gets you actively into your body. And this sense of being in the body and of being embodied is a very important thing, because when we have Uranus afflictions, there is no sense of being in the body. We only feel as if we exist within our head. And that becomes the seed of even greater problems later on in life. So, the advice for this is go count some rice. Don't think it's a stupid thing to do. Actually, give yourself an hour. Say, well, not an hour, that's probably going to be torture, but give yourself 10 minutes and say, I'm going to spend 10 minutes a day counting these grains of rice, and that's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to allow that to be my physical meditative practice. And hey, I'm Uranus. I'm a Uranus type person. I don't want to count rice by myself. I want to count rice with the collective. So go and form a rice counting initiative. And all of you, you can go and form the Rice Counting Coalition, and all of you go and count rice together as a means of getting over some of the angst that we have in life when we have Uranus rising. Counting rice is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. I should probably go count some rice because of my own Uranus afflictions. And short of that, do things that actually allow you to get out of your brain and into your body more, which can be a very challenging thing because the Uranus creates even more of a larger mind body disconnect. But do things to get you out of your brain and into your body more. And one of the best ways to do that is to roll around in the dirt, lay in the dirt, do dirt bathing, or that's not what they call it. Is it sunbathing? Not the sunbathing with the sun, but some sort of nature bathing. I think that's what they call it. Lay down in the grass or something, but give yourself more opportunity to be in nature and allow your observation of nature to be a means of creating a very real anchor of stability and calm within your life. And if you don't have the resources to do that for yourself, join a gardening club, join a foresting club, join a tree planting club, but do things that actually get you out of your head and into your hands and into your feet more often so that you feel a real sense of grounding within your life.
That was amazing and extremely helpful. And it makes sense. You know, it resonates with what I feel would be helpful. But I just, it's just validation and confirmation. So thank you so much.
If you've enjoyed today's show, then please remember to hit subscribe down below. I'm currently on a mission to get 12,000 subscribers across all platforms, which includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify by the end of November 2023. And it's a tall order, but I'm pretty sure we can do it because we make some really good astrological content here on the Oraculos Podcast. So please remember to hit subscribe down below, hit the notification bell so that you receive notifications of when we come out with these episodes on a daily basis. And please share the Oraculos Podcast with your other astrologically minded friends so that more and more people can know about the amazing work that we're doing over here on the Oraculos Podcast.